Hey friends, tonight we begin with how Caveman survived the cold night. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy this kind of slow, calming storytelling. Your support means the world and helps me keep creating peaceful spaces like this one. Tell me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little quiet corner of the internet brings together people from all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan or some soft background, and let's gently into tonight's journey together. The world thousands of years ago was colder, darker, and far less forgiving than the one we know today. Long before the glow of electric lights, before the steady hum of heaters or the comfort of insulated walls, human beings lived at the mercy of nature. The Ice Age wrapped much of the earth in frost, and even regions that are now warm carried a deep chill when night fell. For the caveman, survival was not a given. Each setting sun was a reminder that the hours ahead would test their endurance and their ingenuity. Imagine a band of early humans, living not as isolated individuals, but as small groups bound by necessity. They traveled together for safety, for warmth, for the combined strength that came from many hands. The night is falling on such a group now. The sky turns from deep red to purple, then finally to black, dotted with bright stars that pierce through the clean, frozen air. The bitter wind carries with it not only the icy bite of cold, but the growl of distant predators. The group, a clan of perhaps 20 or so, knows the cold night will soon press against their bones. They have survived such nights before, but each one requires preparation. Fire must be made, shelter must be secured, food must be rationed, children must be protected. The elders, though slower, are revered for their knowledge of how to endure these very nights. The cavemen do not have words as we know them, not fully formed languages, but they communicate in sounds, gestures, and shared memory. One man, broad-shouldered and scarred from old hunts, raises his hand. The others know what this means. It is time to build the night's defense against cold and darkness. First comes the fire. Fire is not simply warmth, it is survival itself. Without it, the cold could stiffen limbs into uselessness, and predators would creep closer with confidence. But fire does not come easily. It is not the flick of a switch. The group gathers dried grass, brittle sticks, and the bark of fallen trees. The air smells of resin, of earth, of faint decay. Two men kneel, crouching low to the ground, and begin the painstaking task of striking stone against stone. The sound of flint colliding rings sharply in the silence of the night. Sparks leap, small and fleeting. The women huddle the younger children closer, wrapping them in furs stripped from animals hunted in warmer times. The furs carry the musky scent of the beasts they once belonged to, but they are thick, insulating the fragile warmth of small bodies. Mothers hum low, almost instinctive. Sounds meant to calm and assure. Finally, after repeated strikes, a spark catches the dry grass. The flame quivers at first, weak and hesitant, before growing bold with every breath of air and every stick carefully placed upon it. The orange glow illuminates their faces. Heavy brows, strong jaws, eyes that reflect both exhaustion and determination. The fire crackles, its light pushing back the shadows that threaten to swallow the group whole. Around the fire, the cavemen draw close. Heat radiates outward, not enough to banish the cold entirely, but enough to keep it bearable. Their shadows dance against the rocky walls of the shelter they have chosen for the night, a shallow cave tucked into the hillside. not deep enough. To be safe from animals, if alone, but with fire and numbers, it becomes a fortress. The cold, however, is relentless. Wind moans across the landscape, carrying snow that dusts the ground outside the cave. Each gust reminds them that warmth is temporary, that nature's chill is always pressing to reclaim them. The group reacts instinctively. They know to sit tightly together, shoulder against shoulder, thigh against thigh. The warmth of many bodies, combined with the fire, makes the difference between life and death. They eat sparingly, chewing tough strips of dried meat. The taste is smoky and bitter, but it fills the stomach enough to dull hunger. Food must be rationed carefully. Hunting is more difficult in the harsh cold, and there are no guarantees of success tomorrow. The fire pops and crackles as grease from the meat, dropped onto the flames, hisses and flares as they eat. The night outside grows louder with unseen dangers. The howl of wolves rises on the wind, answered by the distant roar of a great cat. Children look to their mothers, wide-eyed, but the older hunters grunt low, signaling calm. They have learned to survive not only the cold, but also the constant presence of predators. The fire is their shield, the smell of smoke a warning line. Many beasts will not cross. Still, they remain alert. An elder speaks now, not in words, but in sounds and gestures, telling the young hunters how to watch for signs of predators in the dark. He points to his ears, cupping them to show how listening is as important as seeing. He sweeps his hand low to the ground, showing that tracks in snow tell the story of what passed in the hours before. Though language is still primitive, meaning flows clearly. The young absorb every motion, every tone. The hours creep onward. Above, the stars wheel across the sky. In the firelight, time is marked not by clocks, but by the burning down of wood. One log collapses into embers. Another is placed carefully. On top, coaxed to flame again. The act of feeding the fire becomes ritual, a duty rotated among them. Fire must never die before dawn. The cold deepens as midnight approaches. Breath becomes visible, thick and cloud-like in the air, even close. To the flames, the chill nips at fingers and toes. Some wrap their feet in woven grasses and strips of hide to keep sensation alive. Others draw closer still, pressing in until warmth builds beneath the heap of bodies. The fire flickers, shadows lengthen, and the cave becomes a world unto itself. A fragile island of life surrounded by the vast frozen wilderness. Yet within this island there is also comfort. A child, soothed by the warmth and the steady rhythm of crackling flames, begins to drift into sleep. His head rests on his mother's lap. Another child curls into the side of an older sibling, lulled by the familiar smell of fur and smoke. Even in harshness, humanity finds tenderness. The night continues. A watch is set, for even within the cave, danger is never fully absent. Two hunters sit near the entrance, spears gripped tightly, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the reach of firelight. They hear the crunch of snow under unseen paws, the distant snort of some heavy beast, but no shape emerges. The predators, too, know the danger of fire inside. The others whisper in low tones, sharing fragments of memory. Hunts gone well, the story of a river crossing, the fall of a great tree. These half-formed stories are not mere entertainment. They are the way knowledge passes, how warnings and wisdom travel from one generation to the next. Around fire, humans do more than warm their bodies. They forge the beginnings of culture, and so the cavemen survive another night. Not through luck alone, but through a mixture of fire, shelter, food, vigilance, and the unspoken bond of the group. Each night survived strengthens the chance of surviving the next. Each cold endured, carving lessons into memory. The night stretched on, long and unrelenting, as though the darkness itself was alive. The fire in the center of the group gave a warm glow, but beyond that small circle, the cold crept in, vast and endless. The earth was a frozen expanse, and every gust of wind pressed against the shallow cave like the breath of an unseen giant. The flames danced, snapping and bending in the draft that entered from the opening, scattering sparks that floated briefly before fading into the air. For the caveman, there was no illusion of safety, only the fragile reality of endurance. They had no walls of stone or timber, no doors to bolt against the night. What they had was fire hides, one another, and the wisdom carried down from those who had survived before them. That was enough, but just barely. The hunters on watch shifted, their weight against the cold ground, gripping their stone-tipped spears with raw hands. The flint blades gleamed faintly in the firelight. They had been chipped with patience earlier that season, tested on hunts, stained with the memory of meat and blood. Weapons were not ornaments, not tools of pride, but the thin line between survival and annihilation. Each man kept his eyes sharp, listening to the hiss of the wind and the crackle of the fire, searching for sounds that did not belong. The pad of paws, the low growl of wolves testing their courage, the snap of a branch under the weight of something heavier inside the cave. Bodies pressed together in a mound of heat and breath. Cavemen had learned long ago that warmth was not only about fire, but also about flesh against flesh. Even when hides and furs wrapped them, they leaned on one another, huddled close, sharing the warmth that only living bodies could give. A mother pulled her child tighter against her chest, the child's small hands curled into fists against her skin. The boy's breath came in slow, warm clouds, dampening the fur he lay upon. The woman's own shoulders were tense from the cold, but she found comfort in the familiar weight of her son. An elder stirred beside the fire. His beard was tangled and heavy with frost at the edges, his hair a thick mane streaked with grey. His face was a map of years, each scar a story, each wrinkle a memory of winter after winter endured. He coughed once, a deep, rattling sound, then leaned closer to the flames. His hands, cracked and gnarled, reached for a stick to prod at the fire. Sparks leapt into the cave roof, and he muttered low sounds, half words, half grunts. The younger ones glanced at him, not needing translation. They knew what he was saying. Do not let the fire die. The ritual of keeping fire alive was sacred. It was never left to chance. Someone always fed the flames, even in the slowest hours of the night. The group carried coals from one camp to another, careful not to let them cool completely, for to lose fire meant more than cold. It meant vulnerability. In the deep winter, starting from nothing was a desperate gamble. Flint and tinder could fail. Dampness could smother sparks. Fingers could grow too numb to strike the stones. Fire was life, and so it was guarded like treasure. The clan had other rituals too, small acts that helped them endure the night. Before sleep fully claimed them, some whispered sounds that were part prayer, part story. A man recounted the memory of a great hunt, mimicking the leap of a deer with his hands, the drive of the spear, the fall of the beast. Another woman followed with the low hum of a song, its notes little more than vibration in the throat, but the rhythm was soothing. Around the fire, the voices blended with the crackling wood and the distant cries of predators, creating a rhythm that was both a reminder of danger and reassurance of community. Outside, the wolves had gathered. Their voices rose in the wind, a chorus of howls that swept across the frozen land. The hunters at the entrance stiffened, their knuckles whitening around the shafts of their spears. The wolves circled, unseen but known, their hunger pulling them closer. The smell of smoked meat lingered faintly in the air, carried on the breeze. Predators were drawn to it as surely as moths to flame. But the wolves knew fire too. They had skirted it many times before, had felt the sting of thrown embers and the bite of spears when they strayed too close. Tonight, they prowled the darkness just beyond sight, pacing back and forth. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the moonlight, flickered at the edges of the cave's entrance. A low growl carried on the wind, deep and rumbling. One of the hunters grunted back, a short, defiant sound, his body language sharp and threatening. The wolves did not advance. For now, the balance held. Time passed slowly. Night was a weight, pressing down on them. The fire was fed again and again. Bones popped as people shifted in their sleep, finding new positions, drawing deeper into the warmth of furs. Some lay half awake, never fully surrendering to sleep. It was dangerous to sleep too soundly. Instinct warned them that predators and the cold alike could take advantage. Light sleep was common, punctuated by the occasional startle, a half-dream, of something moving in the dark. The cold grew sharper before dawn. It was always worst in the hours just before the sun returned, as if the night gave one final effort to extinguish the fragile lives it contained. Breath came harsher, limbs stiffened. One man wrapped strips of hide tighter around his legs, pulling at the knots with numb fingers. Another shifted closer to the fire until sparks fell onto his skin, making him flinch. Yet he did not move far, choosing a minor burn over the deeper pain of cold. Still, life persisted. A woman stirred the pot that hung awkwardly over the flames. Made from a hollowed stone lined with clay. Inside was a thin broth, the remnants of marrow boiled from animal bones. It was not rich, but it was warm, and it filled the air with a faint scent of meat that gave the group a sense of hope. She dipped a carved wooden scoop into the steaming liquid, passing it first to the children, then to the older ones. Each sip spread warmth from the inside, driving the cold back for a few moments more. The elder began to hum again, low and steady, as if marking the slow passage of time. His voice was rough but steady, like the crack of dry wood. The fire's light carved his face into lines of determination. He had survived many winters, and he would see them through this one as well. And still, the night went on. The wolves, quieted at last, retreating into the deeper forest in search of easier prey. Their howls faded, leaving only the sighing wind. The hunters at the entrance eased slightly, though they kept their grip on their spears. Beyond the fire's glow, snow fell gently, dusting the ground in silence. The stars were bright, brilliant against the black sky. The group, though weary, could not help but look upward now and then. The heavens above were vast, untouchable, yet they had meaning even to the cavemen. The stars shifted with the seasons, marking migrations of animals, the coming of warmth, the turning of time. No words explained these things, yet the knowledge was felt deeply, woven into survival itself. By the time the horizon began to lighten, the group had made it through. The cold night had not claimed them. Children still breathed softly, curled in their mothers' arms. Hunters still gripped their spears, tired but alert. The fire still burned, low but alive, its embers glowing red. Dawn would soon bring relief, though not safety. Survival was never guaranteed, but each night endured added one more thread to the fragile rope that bound humanity together. And when the first pale light of morning touched the snow outside, the elder smiled faintly, his cracked lips parting around his teeth. The night had been hard, but they had endured. They always endured. The coldest hours had passed, and though the chill still pressed deep into their bones, there was a shift in the air that every caveman felt instinctively. The horizon outside the cave grew faintly grey, the first sign that the sun was stirring. The hunters, bleary-eyed and stiff from hours of vigilance, leaned forward to peer at the faint light that stretched across the snow. Relief was tempered with caution. The night had been survived, but daylight brought its own demands. The fire was coaxed back to a stronger flame. Dry twigs, gathered days earlier and kept under hides to protect them from dampness, were fed into the embers until flames licked high again. The sudden brightness cast the cave walls in sharper relief. Dark outlines of ancient handprints, smudged charcoal drawings, and the marks of claws long faded into stone. Each mark was a memory, a testimony that this cave had sheltered generations. Before them, the group was not the first to crouch here against the dark, and they would not be the last. Children stirred now, rubbing eyes with small fists, blinking into the firelight. Their faces were pale, thin, but brightened with the signs of survival. They wriggled out from the cocoon of hides, stretching their limbs cautiously, shivering at the touch of the morning air. Mothers hushed them, pulling furs back over their shoulders, murmuring soft sounds that had no words but carried comfort all the same. The men began to prepare for the day. Spears were checked again, their points inspected in the firelight. Some touched the flint edges with stones, sharpening them carefully. Others inspected bindings, the strips of sinew that held stone to wood, tightening where they had loosened. These tasks were performed without waste of words, practiced motions carried out with the seriousness of ritual. Weapons were never taken for granted. A single crack in the shaft, a dull edge, could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a death by hunger. The women sorted through the group's remaining supplies. Pouches of dried berries were opened, the tough, wrinkled fruit divided into small handfuls. Strips of smoked meat were chewed slowly, shared first among the children. And the eldest, the pieces were small, but every bite mattered. The smell of marrow broth lingered in the cave, and some scraped at the last clinging remains in the stone pot. Hunger was constant, a shadow that followed every day and night, but it was met with patience. They ate slowly, conserving, teaching. Even the youngest not to gorge when food was scarce. Outside, the light grew brighter, revealing the frozen land in shades of white and blue. The snow gleamed with a brittle beauty, broken only by the dark forms of bare trees and jagged rocks. Animal tracks crisscrossed the ground, some fresh, others nearly erased by the wind. The hunters studied them from the cave mouth, crouching. Lo, here was the faint trail of deer, here the padded impressions of wolves. They read the land like a story, piecing together movements of prey and predator alike. To walk blindly into the snow was to court death. To understand the tracks was to carry the advantage. The wolves had retreated, but their presence still lingered. The hunters knew they would return. Hunger drove all creatures, and wolves were clever, patient. They were rivals in survival, dangerous yet familiar. Sometimes, when the prey was scarce, wolves and men circled the same herds. each testing the other, each stealing opportunity when it came. There were nights when wolves became the hunted, their pelts stripped for warmth, their meat eaten despite its toughness. There were other nights when men fell to their teeth, their blood marking the snow. It was a balance that had no end. The elder rose stiffly now, leaning on a staff of wood polished, smooth with age. His eyes squinted into the light, and he spoke low sounds that caught the attention of all. He gestured toward the sky, toward the faint red that tinged the horizon, then toward the tracks outside. His words were few, but the meaning was clear. The night had passed, the day demanded action. Prey was near, and food must be taken. The hunters prepared to leave. They wrapped their furs tighter, tied strips of hide around their feet, and slung pouches across their shoulders. The youngest among them, eager but untested, looked to the older men for guidance. One of the seasoned hunters handed him a spear, heavy in his small hands, and gestured for him to follow. This was how learning happened, not through words, but through walking the same ground, through sharing the danger of the hunt. Inside the cave, the women and children gathered, closer around the fire once the hunters slipped away. The cave felt larger without them, but also more vulnerable. The women sharpened bone tools, scraped at hides, worked with patience even as they listened for any sign of trouble outside. Some took turns feeding the fire, ensuring its steady strength. The children, restless now that light had returned, played quietly with carved bones and stones, their small games imitating the hunts they had seen. One child held a stick like a spear, jabbing at the ground, his face fierce, though laughter soon broke through his act. His mother smiled faintly, a rare softness breaking through the strain of survival. As the morning unfolded, life settled into its rhythm again. Tasks were divided without words, each member of the group knowing their place, their role in the fragile web that kept them alive. No one was unnecessary. Even the smallest child contributed in ways unseen, with hope, with the promise of a future. Every life mattered, because each was a piece of the clan's endurance against the world. The sun climbed higher, sending pale warmth across the snow. It was not enough to melt the frost, but it was enough to remind them that winter, no matter how cruel, was not endless. The seasons would turn, as they always did. For now, survival was about patience, making it through each night, each morning, until the land softened again and food became abundant. Yet, as the elder sat near the fire, humming softly to himself, his gaze lingered on the cave walls. The handprints, the drawings, the blackened scars of smoke all told the same truth. Others had faced nights like this before. Others had survived, and because of them, his clan lived now. His eyes closed briefly, and in the hum of his voice was the memory of countless nights endured, countless fires guarded against the dark, and in the sound of the children's laughter, faint but real, was the promise that they would endure again. The hunters moved into the pale light of morning, their breaths streaming white against the cold air. Each step sank into the snow with a crunch, muffled by the vast silence of the frozen land. The world outside the cave was endless and harsh. A wide plain, broken by patches of forest and low ridges that jutted like the bones of the earth. Their furs were pulled tight, but the cold pierced through regardless, numbing fingers, stiffening joints. The men gripped their spears more tightly, if only to keep the blood moving in their hands. The trail of deer was faint but visible, marked by cloven hooves pressed into the frost. The elder hunter crouched to examine them more closely. He brushed snow aside, pressing his palm against the imprint, feeling its edges. He muttered a sound, low and short, and pointed ahead. The animal was not far. They had passed this way in the night, searching for what little grazing they could find beneath. The snow. The hunters set off again, their pace steady, their eyes always moving, watching the tracks, watching the trees, watching the sky for the circling of birds that could signal both prey and danger. For hours they pressed forward, following the trail. The snow deepened in places, forcing them to lift their legs high, muscles aching with the effort. The younger hunter stumbled more than once, his spear nearly dropping, but each time one of the older men gave him a sharp glance and a grunt, reminding him that there was no room for weakness. He carried on, chest heaving, determined not to falter again at last. Movement stirred at the edge of the forest. Shapes shifted between the trees, dark bodies against the pale trunks. The hunters dropped low, crouching behind a rise in the snow. Deer, thin and restless, pawed at the ground, their breath steaming. Their ears flicked nervously, their eyes wide, as though they already sensed they were being watched. The hunters signaled one another with subtle gestures, a raised hand, a tilt of the head. Words were unnecessary. They had hunted together too many times, and silence was survival. The group fanned out, circling slowly, pressing closer with each careful step. Every footfall was placed with care. The snow pressed down softly to avoid noise. Spears were gripped tighter, eyes fixed on the prey. Then, in a sudden burst, the deer bolted. White plumes of snow erupted as their hooves struck the ground, and the hunters sprang forward. Shouts tore from their throats, sharp cries that carried across the forest, meant to drive confusion into the herd. Spears flashed as they were hurled, the sound of stone tips slicing air before striking. One missed, embedding deep in the frozen ground. Another grazed, drawing blood but not felling the creature. Then a third struck true, piercing the flank. Of a deer, the animal stumbled, crashing into the snow, kicking wildly. The hunters surged forward. The wounded deer struggled to rise, its eyes rolling with terror, but the men closed in swiftly. Spears struck again, ending its movement in a flurry of sound and breath. Steam rose from its body, hot against the cold morning air, as the men stood over their kill, their faces, grim and tight with effort, softened with the satisfaction of success. Hunger had been kept at bay, at least for a while longer. The younger hunter approached, his chest still heaving. He had not landed the killing blow, but he had run with the others, shouted with them, and faced the fear of failure. One of the older men clapped a heavy hand against his shoulder, a rare gesture of approval. He straightened with pride, though he said nothing. The lesson was unspoken. Survival was a shared victory. They worked quickly now, skinning and butchering with practiced hands. Flint knives sliced through hide, sinew, and flesh, separating what could be carried back. The pelt was rolled, the meat divided into bundles, and the bone split to release the precious marrow. Blood stained the snow, a vivid reminder of the exchange, life taken for life sustained. Ravens circled above, their harsh cries echoing through the cold air, waiting for scraps. The hunters ignored them, intent on their task. Back at the cave, the women kept the fire strong and the children close. They listened for sounds outside, every distant cry of an animal tightening their shoulders with fear. When at last they saw the figures of the hunters returning, burdened with meat and hide, a wave of relief rippled through the group. The children ran forward, their faces bright, but were pulled back quickly. reminded that knives and blood were dangerous things. The meat was laid near the fire, the smell rising as it warmed. Strips were set aside to be roasted immediately, while others were cut thin and hung near the smoke to preserve them for days to come. Women worked with swift, careful hands, using sharpened bones to slice and stretch the hide. The cave filled with sound, now the crackle of the fire, the murmur of voices, the laughter of children, the steady rhythm of knives against bone as the first pieces of meat roasted. The smell was almost overwhelming after so many days of hunger. When at last it was eaten, chewed slowly and shared equally, warmth spread through their bodies that the fire alone could not give. Even the elder smiled faintly as he chewed, his lined face easing for the first time since the night began. Survival had been earned once more. Night would come again, as it always did, bringing cold and danger, but for now the weight was lighter. They had endured one night, hunted through one day, and fed their people. The cycle would begin again tomorrow, and again after that, but with every fire lit, every hunt completed, every child kept alive, the story of their endurance grew longer. For the caveman life was not measured in years or seasons, but in nights survived. And on this cold day, with full bellies and warmth close at hand, they had won another small victory in the endless struggle against the dark. The sun sank slowly across the frozen horizon, its pale orange light spilling over the land, lengthening the shadows of stone ridges and bare trees. The hunters had returned, their burden of meat laid out, and for a moment the group felt the rare comfort of full bellies. Yet no matter how rich the day had been, the falling sun always carried with it a heaviness. Night was not a time of rest, but of vigilance, when the cold deepened and the unseen creatures of the dark prowled the edges of safety. The women worked swiftly, stripping sinew from bones, twisting it into cord that would bind hides together. For warmth, children helped in their way, gathering dry twigs and snapping them into pieces small enough to feed the fire. The smoke curled upward, pressing against the cave roof and leaving dark stains along the stone. They were stains of survival, layer upon layer of nights endured. The elder sat near the entrance, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His body was thin, his skin weathered, but his presence carried weight. In his silence, he carried memory. He had seen more winters than any other, more hunts, more losses, and the others respected that. He tapped the ground with a stick, marking time as the sun slipped lower. His gaze drifted now and then to the younger hunter, the one who had faltered during the chase. The boy's shoulders were sore, but he busied himself with scraping marrow from bones, eager to show his worth. As dusk deepened, the group began to prepare for night. Furs were shaken and layered near the fire. Children pressed together in clusters, and the women laid strips of meat across hot stones to roast. The smell was rich and heavy, mixing with smoke and the faint musk of hides. But for every comfort, there was tension. The night outside was vast, and they were but a fragile circle of warmth within it. The men reinforced the mouth of the cave with stones, stacking them higher to leave only a narrow gap. It was no true wall, but it was something, a signal to beasts that the entrance was guarded. They sharpened their spears again, dragging flint across the points until sparks jumped in the darkening air. Every sound seemed louder now. The crack of wood, the hiss of fat dripping into fire, the whistle of the wind as it crept through the cave's opening. When the last light faded, the world turned to shades of blue and grey. The snow outside glowed, faintly a reflection of the moon and stars above. It was a different kind of beauty, harsh and distant, but in its quiet way. It reminded them of the enormity of the world beyond their cave. The children whispered together, asking stories of the stars. One woman pointed upward through the crack of the cave's mouth, where constellations glittered. She spoke in soft tones, naming them as she had been taught. Hunters in the sky, beasts frozen in their chase, fires that never died. The children listened wide-eyed, the firelight dancing across their faces. For a moment, the night did not seem as heavy, but outside, the wolves had begun to stir. Their howls rose in the distance, carried on the wind, thin at first, then stronger as more joined the call. It was not yet close, but the sound alone was enough to chill the heart. The hunters stiffened, gripping their spears, exchanging glances. The women hushed the children, pressing them close, as though the sound itself could draw the beasts nearer. The elder closed his eyes, listening. Wolves were not new. They had always been there, a shadow moving with the people across the land. But hunger drove them closer in winter, bold enough to test the safety of men. He murmured a low sound, a warning, and the hunters took their places near the stones at the cave's mouth. Their silhouettes stood tall in the firelight, dark against the glow, spears in hand. Inside, the cave was tense, yet life continued. Meat-roasted children dozed, and women worked hides with steady motions. Survival meant carrying on, even when fear gnawed at the edges. The fire was fed constantly, the flames leaping high, for its glow was their strongest shield. The night crept deeper. The howls grew closer. Eyes glimmered faintly beyond the snow, just beyond the reach of firelight. The wolves circled, silent now, their paws pressing softly into the frost. The hunters shifted, muscles tight, breaths shallow. It was not yet an attack, but a test, a reminder that the night was never truly theirs. And so the second night began, not in silence, but in the haunting song of predators at the edge of the dark. The fire cracked, spitting sparks into the smoky air, and every eye inside the cave turned to the entrance. The shapes moved in silence now, no longer howling but crouching low, pacing just beyond the reach of light. Their eyes glowed like scattered embers in the snow, darting, watching, waiting. The youngest hunter tightened his grip on his spear. His hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. He remembered stories of wolves tearing through camps, scattering fire, carrying away children. He pushed the thoughts away and fixed his gaze on the flickering shadows outside. The elder leaned forward. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but in the hush of the cave it carried weight. "They test," he murmured. "They look for weakness. They will not rush while the fire burns strong." The men nodded, feeding another log into the flames. The blaze rose, casting a deeper glow against the stone walls, but wood was not endless. Already the pile had shrunk from the day's gathering. They would need to ration carefully if the night stretched long. A soft whimper broke the silence. One of the smaller children, half asleep, had stirred from the sound outside. A mother pulled the child close, wrapping her fur cloak tightly around them. She hummed softly, a rhythm older than words, meant to calm the child and herself alike. The wolves drew nearer. One stepped boldly into sight, its fur bristling, its muzzle glistening with frost. It paced left, then right, its movements restless, testing the air. A hunter shifted, raising his spear, but the elder held out a hand. "Wait," he breathed. "Do not waste strength." Time passed slowly, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. The fire hissed and popped. The hunters' shadows leaped across the walls like spirits locked in dance. The wolves circled, their paws leaving faint prints in the snow, their eyes never blinking dot. At last, one of them lunged forward, snapping at the stones stacked at the entrance. The hunters shouted, slamming their spears against the rock, and the beast recoiled, teeth flashing before it slipped back into the dark. The others barked sharply, the sound echoing across the plain, a chorus of hunger. Inside the cave, the group clutched each other tighter. They knew this would not be the last test. The wolves would return again and again, pressing at their defenses. Until dawn broke or weakness showed, the elder spoke softly, his words steady even as his face remained stern. The fire is our sun in the night. Feed it, guard it. As long as it lives, we live. So they tended the flames, not letting them sink low, not letting darkness creep closer. Women stripped dry bark from branches, hunters split thicker logs into smaller pieces, and children gathered even twigs from the cave floor. Every scrap of wood became precious, every flame a shield. Hours dragged on. The wolves struck again, darting forward, retreating, their claws scraping stone. Spears jabbed out, striking only air, but the cries of the hunters kept them at bay. The beasts snarled and circled, their patience long, their hunger longer still. Yet within the cave, resolve grew. Fear had first held them stiff and trembling. But as each test passed, as each howl faded back into the night, their courage steadied. The hunters no longer looked at each other with panic, but with unspoken rhythm. One raised his spear, another fed the fire, another guarded the gap. They moved together, a wall of flesh and will against the teeth of the dark. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, the wolves drew back. Their howls receded, carried on the wind, softer than distant. The hunters did not relax at once. They kept their spears raised, their eyes sharp, waiting for another sudden rush. But silence grew, broken only by the crackle of flame. The elder exhaled, long and slow. They will not return tonight. No one moved for a time. The children slept once more, curled into their mother's sides. The hunters slumped against the stone, their spears across their knees. Fatigue pulled at them, but they knew they had endured. The firelight bathed their faces, and in its glow they found fragile comfort. The cold was still there, pressing from all sides, but the wolves were gone. For now, the cave belonged to them. The elder leaned back, his eyes half closed, and spoke the words that had always followed nights like this: "We live another dawn." The cave felt quieter now, though the cold pressed as heavily as ever. Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling, faint trails escaping through cracks where the stone met sky. The hunters still sat with their spears, though their arms drooped with exhaustion. Eyes burned from the strain of watching shadows that no longer moved. Yet no one dared to sleep fully. The children were the first to slip into dreams. Their small breaths rose in soft clouds, warming their mothers' chests. One child clutched a carved bone figurine, smooth from generations of hands passing it down. Another slept with a fur scrap over his head, as if it could block the memory of glowing eyes outside. The mothers whispered to each other, trading fragments of comfort. They spoke of hunts past, of springs when rivers swelled with fish, of summers when berries grew so thick the baskets could not carry them all. Their voices were low, more for themselves than for anyone else, stitching together hope with memory. The fire burned steadily, but its hunger never ended. Each log cracked in protest, each spark consumed into ash. The hunters fed it sparingly now, knowing the night was long. One young man rose to fetch a branch, his shadow stretching long across the stone. For a moment, he paused at the entrance, staring into the black plain. Snow glistened faintly under a thin shard of moonlight, but no eyes stared back. He lingered still, straining to hear the distant echoes of howls, but none came. Only the wind moved. When he returned, the elder's gaze met his. "Do not linger," the old man warned. "The dark tempts fools. It hides more than wolves." The hunter nodded, settling back beside the flame. Yet curiosity gnawed at him. What else waited beyond the firelight? He had seen the eyes of wolves, yes, but what of the stories told by the elder spirits of the dead who wandered in storms? Giants that lived in the mountains, beasts with teeth longer than spears. The night seemed vast enough to hold them. All he shivered and pressed closer to the fire. Sleep crept upon the weary like a patient predator. One by one, the hunters' eyes closed. They did not let go of their spears, but their heads bowed, their breathing slowed. The elder remained awake the longest, his mind sharpened by decades of nights like these. He stared into the flames as if reading them, seeing not only the fire but memories of other winters. Other trials. Dreams came to the tribe like drifting smoke. Some dreamed of warmth, the heavy sun of summer, the river thick with salmon, the soft grass underfoot. Others dreamed of fear, of running barefoot through snow as wolves gave chase, of fire gone out, of darkness swallowing everything. Dreams were part of survival too, teaching lessons in ways no words could. The cave held their voices even in slumber. Soft mutterings slipped from lips, fragments of thought and memory tangled together. A mother murmured the name of a child lost seasons ago. A hunter whispered of deer fleeing into the brush. The elder hummed a soundless rhythm, one he carried only in his chest. Outside, the world did not rest. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of fairer things, the musk of elk moving south, the faint rot of leaves buried under snow, and the lingering trail of the wolves as they padded back into the forest. Stars wheeled overhead, cold and sharp, but no one inside the cave looked upon them. Hours dragged like stones. The fire dimmed, then was fed again. Shadows grew tall, then shrank. The cave seemed to breathe with them, each shift of flame reshaping its face. For those half awake, the walls themselves seemed alive, painted with shapes that looked like running beasts, hunters, spirits with antlers and wings. Perhaps they were illusions born of smoke, or perhaps something older had always dwelled in the stone. A young boy stirred, eyes fluttering open. He sat up, listening. The silence frightened him more than the howls had. At least howls meant the wolves were known, seen, and named. Silence was endless, filled with the unknown. He crawled toward his mother, pressing himself against her side, and she drew him in without waking fully. The elder's voice finally broke the hush. Low, steady, barely above a growl. "Fire is our shield," he said again, the words an anchor against fear. "It burns the night, it burns the spirits, it burns the hunger." He spoke not to anyone in particular, but to the cave itself, to the stone, to the fire. Ritual words, ancient, meant to keep balance. The others did not stir, but the sound seemed to settle them. The boy drifted back into sleep. The hunters shifted less restlessly. Even the elder, after speaking the words, let his eyes close at last. The night crept on, heavy and unbroken, a long stretch of darkness wrapped tight around the cave. The fire had burned itself low. What once was a proud blaze, reaching upward with sparks and light, had now settled into a bed of glowing embers. They pulsed faintly, like the last heartbeat of a dying beast, red veins hidden beneath a fragile skin of ash. Each breath of wind at the cave's mouth teased the coals, stirring them to glow brighter for a moment before letting them dim again. The hunters woke first, startled by the cold that pressed against their backs. One man reached for the spear still clenched in his hand. Another pulled his fur mantle tighter. They looked to the embers and knew more wood was needed. A log was added, and the flames licked upward once more, but weakly. The pile of fuel had grown thin. The elder stirred, opening his eyes to the faintest hint of change outside. The darkness was not absolute anymore. The mouth of the cave showed, a shade lighter than black, a whisper of grey that came with the first hints of dawn. His eyes, accustomed to many nights, caught it before the others did. "The night loosens," he muttered, though his voice was cracked with fatigue. The children still slept, but restlessly now. They whimpered, shifting against their mother's arms, their dreams turning with the tide of light. One child called out, soft and broken, as though pleading with the world not to take something away. His mother hushed him gently, though she herself trembled from the chill that seeped deeper now that the fire was small. The hunters' bellies growled, hollow reminders of yesterday's thin meals. They had eaten dried roots, a strip of sinew chewed for hours, and the marrow of a single cracked bone. Today they would need more. The cold had drained them, the fear had wearied them, and only food could mend that loss. They looked at one another in silence, each knowing what must come with daylight. The hunt. The elder leaned close to the fire and whispered old words again, words that spoke of gratitude to flame. He thanked it for standing guard through the night, for holding back teeth and claws, for being the heart of their circle. He pressed, his palm close to the embers, wincing at the heat, then drew it back across his chest. The others did not question him. Rituals mattered most when the world felt fragile. Outside, the wind changed. It no longer howled as it had in the dead of night. It softened, carrying with it sense of waking earth beneath the snow of trees, groaning under ice, of distant water running unseen under frozen crust. And faintly, almost too faintly to believe, came the call of a bird. One sharp note, cutting the silence. The hunters raised their heads. Dawn was real. The boy who had woken earlier stirred again. This time, he rose to his knees and stared toward the cave's mouth. His eyes widened. "Light," he whispered, pointing with a small, trembling finger. They all turned. Yes, there it was. A line, thin as a thread, drawn across the horizon. Not warmth, not yet, but a promise of warmth too. Come. The world outside was still dangerous, but the long terror of night had ended. The mothers began to rouse the children, shaking their shoulders gently, calling them back from dreams. Groggy eyes blinked, tiny hands rubbed faces, and one by one, the young sat up. Their breaths still smoked in the air. But now they saw what their elders saw, the night breaking apart. The elder stood slowly, his bones stiff and reluctant. He leaned on his staff, gazing out at the horizon. His words carried both pride and warning. We live because the fire lived. We live because we did not walk into the dark. But another night will come, remember. The hunters nodded, understanding. Their survival was never a single victory, but a chain of them, each link forged with fire, caution, and the will to endure. They strapped on their furs, checked the points of their spears, and prepared for the day. The cave's shadows grew softer as the light grew stronger. What had once looked alive in the flicker of fire now revealed itself as only stone, rough and harmless. The shapes of beasts and spirits faded into cracks and crevices. The children laughed in relief, though quietly, as though still afraid the shadows might hear. The first rays of sun touched the snow outside, glinting like scattered shards of crystal. The hunters squinted, adjusting to brightness after so much. Dark, the mothers herded the children back, deeper into the cave, keeping them away from the cold rush that entered when the hunters prepared to step out. The elder remained by the fire, watching both the embers and the light beyond the cave. He knew the balance would continue: fire at night, sun by day, hunger pressing them forward, fear holding them back. This was the rhythm of their lives, endless, unforgiving, but also unbroken. One hunter looked back before leaving, his gaze lingering on the fire and the family gathered close to it. He saw their faces, lined with exhaustion, but also with determination. For them, he would go into the snow. For them, he would bring back meat and hide, whatever the forest would yield. He tightened his grip on his spear, and the dawn light caught, its sharpened tip flashing like fire reborn. The cold night was over, but survival was never truly over. The hunters stepped out of the cave, their breath pouring in heavy clouds into the pale morning air. The snow crunched beneath their feet, stiff and unyielding from the long night's frost. Spears rested across their shoulders, their sharpened tips gleaming faintly in the newborn light. The fire's warmth lingered behind them, but out here, the cold clutched hard, seeping into their bones with each step. The world was silent, too silent. No birds stirred in the branches, no animals moved across the white expanse. Even the wind, which had howled through the night, now stilled, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. Silence could mean safety, but more often it meant emptiness, and emptiness meant hunger. One of them crouched, pressing his palm to the snow, studying faint impressions, tracks, small, scattered, already half hidden by frost. A hare, perhaps, or a fox. The signs were old. The animal had passed long before the night reached its deepest hour. Still, the hunter nodded to the others, and they adjusted their path to follow what little trail remained. Their furs brushed against frozen branches as they moved deeper into the trees. The forest was a maze of black trunks, skeletal and bare, their limbs coated with a brittle glaze of ice. Now and then, the hunters paused, tilting their heads, listening for the faintest stir of movement. Hunger sharpened their senses. Every crackle of snow underfoot setting their hearts racing with hope or fear. Behind them, the cave grew small, swallowed by distance and shadow. The families left within would wait, tending the fire, watching. The children and praying the hunters would return with meat. All knew that if the hunt failed, the long night had only been survived to face a slower trial. Hunger could kill as surely as wolves. The hunters pressed on. They knew these lands well. They knew where hares dug shallow burrows, where deer might leave tracks along the frozen river, where birds might be flushed from branches if they were lucky. But winter changed everything. The snow-muffled sound covered trails and drove many animals deep into hidden dens. At last, one hunter lifted his hand, halting the others. He pointed to the base of a tree where the snow had been disturbed. A small hollow lay there, the faintest breath of warmth rising from beneath the crust. They crouched low, exchanging quick glances, their eyes shining with sudden urgency. A hare. They moved with caution, surrounding the spot, their spears poised. The lead hunters stomped suddenly, hard, sending vibrations through the snow. The ground quivered, and in an instant, a blur of white burst upward. The hare bolted, its legs a flash of desperate speed against the snow. The hunters lunged. Spears darted forward, one striking the earth, another slicing air. The third connected, glancing the hare and slowing it just enough for another to leap forward, club raised. A final blow, swift and heavy, ended the chase. The silence of the forest returned, but now it carried a different weight triumph. The hunters stood over the still body of the hare, steam rising faintly from its fur. It was small, barely enough to feed a single family, but it was life. It was proof the land had not abandoned them. They skinned it quickly, wasting no time. The pelt would be used for warmth, the meat roasted, the bones cracked for marrow. Nothing would be discarded. The hunter who delivered the final blow whispered thanks over the body, a ritual as old as their tribe. Gratitude was owed even to the smallest creature, for its life would become theirs. But hunger remained. One hare would not be enough. They pressed on, deeper into the woods, their eyes ever searching. The forest thickened, shadows lengthening despite the rising sun. The air grew sharper, and the hunters pulled their furs tighter. At the edge of a frozen clearing, they stopped. Across the white expanse, a line of tracks stretched, heavy and deep. Not hare, not fox, larger. The hunters' pulses quickened. These were the prints of deer, their hooves leaving clear marks in the snow. Hope surged, tempered with caution. A deer meant enough food for the entire tribe, but it also meant danger. The chase would be long, the cold merciless. And if the deer fought back with sharp hooves or antlers, blood could be spilled on both sides. Still, they knew they must try. The tribe depended on them. They lowered themselves, scanning the line of tracks, preparing for the hunt that would test every ounce of their strength and skill. The frozen world waited in silence, vast and indifferent, as the hunters moved forward again, chasing survival across the snow. The hunters crouched over the deep hoofprints pressed into the snow. They ran their fingers along the edges, testing the sharpness, the freshness. The tracks were clean, crisp, unmarred by frost. This was no old trail. The deer had passed here, only moments before. Their hearts quickened. The hunt was real. The chance of meat lay just ahead. Without speaking, they fell into motion, their bodies leaning low as they followed the winding path. The forest opened into a wide field of snow, glistening with the light of the rising sun. Across that field, just at the edge of the trees, a flicker of movement caught the eye legs, swift and slender, bounding through the whiteness. The deer had seen them. The chase began. The hunters broke into a run, their feet pounding hard against the snow, their lungs burning with the icy air. Spears jostled in their hands, their furs flaring behind them. The deer was fast, its muscles taut, each leap carrying it farther across the field. Yet the hunters pressed on, their endurance built from years of survival, from countless hunts where failure meant hunger and hunger meant death. The snow betrayed them. Each step was heavy, sinking, dragging their legs. But the deer, light-footed, bounded across the crust as though it were no obstacle at all. Still, the hunters did not relent. Their strength was not in speed, but in persistence. A deer could run fast, yes, but for how long? They knew this truth. No animal, however swift, could outlast the relentless press of humankind. The chase stretched on. The deer reached the tree line, weaving between the black skeletons of trees. Branches whipped against the hunters' faces, sharp ice shattering in bursts as they forced their way through. Their breaths grew ragged, their hearts thundered, but still they pressed forward, tracking the flash of fur. The trail of broken snow, one hunter stumbled, falling to his knees, his spear clattering against the frozen ground. The others did not slow, though one cast him a brief glance of concern. He rose quickly, his breath sharp, and sprinted once more, refusing to be left behind. The bond of the tribe demanded it. The deer veered toward the river. The hunters knew. This place knew the thin ice that formed along its edges. They hoped the animal might stumble, might crash through, buying them precious seconds. But the deer was clever, avoiding the weakest patches, skirting across with light, careful steps. The hunters followed, slower, cautious, their eyes flicking to the cracks beneath their feet. The sound of groaning ice followed them as they crossed, each stride heavy with danger. On the far side, the chase resumed. The deer was still ahead, still strong, its body shimmering with sweat despite the cold. But the hunters saw what others might not: the tilt of its head, the flick of its ears, the growing heaviness of its leaps. It was tiring. Slowly, the balance began to shift. They spread out, fanning across the forest floor. One hunter to the left, another to the right, the third pressing close behind. Together, they funneled the deer, forcing it along a narrow path between two slopes. The terrain worked in their favor now. The slopes funneled the sound of its labored breathing back to them, guiding their pursuit even when their eyes lost sight of the blur of motion ahead. Time stretched, the chase becoming more than a pursuit. It was a battle of will, a test of endurance. The hunters' feet bled inside their boots, their muscles screamed, yet they pressed on. The deer stumbled once, recovered, but they had seen it. Weakness, a moment of faltering. Hope burned in their chests. At last, the forest thinned, and before them stretched another clearing, wide and flat. The deer burst forth, desperate for open space. But the hunters followed, closing the gap. One raised his spear, judging the distance, the angle. His arm drew back. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the point of his weapon, the rhythm of his breath, the pounding of his heart. He cast the spear. It flew true, slicing through the cold air with a whistle. The deer twisted at the last instant, the point grazing its flank. A shallow wound, blood splattering against the snow. The deer stumbled, its leap faltering, but it did not fall. With a desperate surge, it pushed forward, fear and pain fueling its flight. The hunters roared, their cries echoing across the clearing, driving themselves harder. The scent of blood filled their nostrils, raw and metallic. The deer's trail was marked now, easy to follow, crimson drops staining the whiteness. It was wounded, it would weaken. It was only a matter of time, yet time was cruel. Their lungs seared, their legs heavy as stone. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, thirst cracked their lips. They had been running for hours, their bodies demanding rest, but rest could not come. The deer's life was the difference between survival and despair. One hunter faltered again, leaning against a tree, his vision blurring. He spat into the snow, forcing himself upright. They could not fail, not now, not with the tribe waiting. He pushed forward once more, driven by desperation, by duty, by the faces of children waiting for food that would not come unless they triumphed. Here, ahead, the deer staggered again. Its leaps grew shorter, clumsy, its breath visible in harsh bursts of steam. The hunters exchanged a glance, wordless but certain. The end was near. They pressed harder, closing in, the sound of their feet, pounding like drums against the snow. Spears rose once more, their sharp points glinting in the cold sun. The final moment of the chase was coming, swift and brutal. The deer's strength waned. Its body sagged, its legs trembling. It leaped once more, but the leap was shallow, collapsing into the snow for a heartbeat. It tried to rise, but the hunters were upon it. A spear struck true, this time, piercing deep. The deer cried out, a sound that split the stillness of the forest, then fell silent. Steam rose from its body, the snow beneath it stained dark. The hunters stood around it, panting, their chests heaving, their faces lined with exhaustion and relief. They had done it. The deer was theirs. They lowered their spears, offering quiet. Words of thanks, gratitude for the life taken. One placed a hand on the animal's still body, whispering a prayer, as was the way of their people. The chase was over. Survival for another night was assured. The hunters stood in silence around the fallen deer. Their breath puffed in white clouds, their shoulders sagged, and their legs trembled beneath them. The chase had stripped them bare of energy, but the prize was undeniable. Meat, warmth, chance to live through another cold night. Yet even as relief washed over them, reality pressed in. The deer was large, heavier than any one man could carry. Their triumph was not the end, only the beginning of the struggle. One hunter knelt beside the animal, his hand resting on its flank. He whispered thanks, words taught to him by the elders, a ritual meant to honor the spirit of the creature. For every life taken, respect was due. He traced a line of blood across his forehead, a mark of humility. The others followed, each adding their own silent prayers. Then came the work. With stone blades sharpened against river rocks, they cut into the carcass. The steam rose from its warm body, curling into the cold air. The smell of blood mingled with the scent of pine and frost. They worked quickly, their hands steady despite the shaking of exhaustion. From the ribs, they took strips of meat, wrapping them in hides carried for this purpose. But they could not take everything here. Scavengers would smell the kill soon. Enough. Wolves, great cats, even rival hunters might come. They had to move. The strongest of them lashed the remaining body with sinew cords, dragging it onto a makeshift sled of branches. The others packed meat into satchels, securing it tightly. When all was ready, they bent their backs beneath the burden, gripping the cords with raw, chapped hands. The journey home began. The snow was deeper now, the storm clouds thickening above. The sun had risen fully, but its light offered no warmth. Each step was agony, their legs heavy, their shoulders screaming with pain. The sled groaned against the snow, dragging deep furrows as they pulled it. Their breath came in ragged gasps, their lungs raw from the cold. Yet they did not stop. Behind them, the trail was stained red where blood still leaked from the deer. They knew the danger of that trail. Already, the wilderness stirred. A howl echoed faintly in the distance, carried on the icy wind. Wolves had caught the scent. The hunters exchanged glances, grim and tense. They had no choice but to continue, to pull harder, to move faster. The forest thickened, branches clawing at their faces, snow tumbling down in showers as they passed beneath. The sled snagged on roots, caught on stones, but they wrenched it, free with curses and gritted teeth. The thought of the tribe waiting gave them strength. Children's faces flashed in their minds, thin, hungry, their wide eyes searching for food. The tribe depended on them. Failure was unthinkable. Hours dragged by. The hunters' lips split from the cold, their fingers numb despite being wrapped in furs. One stumbled, falling to his knees, his hands sinking into the snow. For a moment, he did not rise, his body threatening to surrender. But the others called. To him, voices hoarse but insistent. He forced himself up, staggering forward, refusing to let weakness claim him. The howls grew louder, closer. The wolves were following now, tracking them along the bloody trail. Shadows moved between the trees, dark shapes flickering in the corner of their eyes. The hunters knew what this meant. The wolves would test them, circling, waiting for a mistake, for weakness, for the chance to strike. One hunter picked up a burning branch from the bundle they carried, lighting it with sparks from flint. He waved it high, the fire sputtering but defiant in the wind. The wolves respected fire, though they did not fear it forever. It bought time, nothing more. The group pressed on, their legs buckled with fatigue, their stomachs aching with hunger. But step by step, they carried their burden. The path grew steeper as they neared the ridge that led back toward their cave. Snow slipped beneath their boots, dragging them down, but still they climbed. Their muscles screamed, their backs bent, but their will was stronger than the cold. The wolves appeared fully then, a pack of grey forms slipping from the tree line, eyes glowing yellow in the pale light. They fanned out, low and silent, there, paws leaving no sound in the snow. The hunters froze, their spears raised, the sled resting behind them. The wolves tested the line, darting closer, teeth bared, before retreating. The firebrand was thrust toward them, the flames crackling defiantly. For a time, it held them at bay. The standoff stretched, breath steaming, hearts pounding. The hunters knew they could not fight and drag the deer at once. They would need to outlast the wolves, to convince them that the prey was not worth the risk. Slowly, step by step, they edged backward, spears pointed, fire waving. The wolves followed, pacing, their growls rumbling like thunder in the silence of the snow at last. One wolf lunged, teeth snapping, eyes blazing with hunger. A spear flashed, thrust deep into its chest. The animal yelped, twisting, then fell, limp into the snow. The pack howled in rage, circling closer, but the hunters stood firm, snarling like the beasts themselves. The fire roared brighter as another branch was lit, casting fierce shadows across the clearing. The wolves hesitated. One by one, they backed away, dragging the fallen packmate with them. Hunger drove them, but fear weighed heavier tonight. For now, the hunters had won. Exhausted beyond words, the men turned back to their burden. They pulled once more, step by step, their bodies shaking with the effort. The deer weighed heavier than stone, yet still they carried it forward, closer, and closer to the ridge where the cave awaited. The sky had darkened by the time they reached the edge of their camp's valley. The smoke of the fire pit rose faintly in the distance, curling into the sky. Relief coursed through them at the sight. They were almost home, almost safe. Still, the final stretch remained. The climb down into the valley was treacherous, the snow slick and the rocks jagged. Their muscles burned as they lowered the sled carefully, guiding it inch by inch. One slip could mean disaster, the loss of both the deer and their own lives. But slowly, carefully, they descended. At last, the cave came into view, its mouth glowing with the warmth of firelight. The hunters staggered forward, every ounce of strength spent, but their prize intact. As they entered, the tribe rose to greet them, eyes wide with awe and joy. Children clapped their hands. Women reached forward to touch the deer. Voices rose in thanks. The hunters collapsed to their knees, their bodies trembling, but their spirits soaring. They had done it. They had faced the night, the storm, the wolves, and the endless chase and returned with life in their hands. The tribe would eat. They would live, and for one more night, in the endless cold of the world they had endured. The hunters collapsed onto the stone floor of the cave, their chests heaving, their hands raw, their legs trembling beneath them. Around them, the tribe surged with relief. The cries of children echoed, high and sharp with joy, while the elders whispered thanks to the spirits. The deer, though lifeless, carried a sacred weight proof that even in the cruelest season, life could still be claimed from the wilderness. Women and older children moved quickly, cutting away the bindings of sinew that had held the sled together. The deer was rolled to the fire's edge, its shadow stretching huge and dark against the wall of the cave. The flames crackled, filling the air with heat that wrapped around the weary men like a blanket. Steam still rose faintly from the animals' open wounds, and the hunters inhaled deeply, their stomachs growling with desperate hunger. An elder stepped forward, his beard thick with frost, his eyes lit with reverence. He raised his hand and began to chant. The words were old, older than memory, passed down through countless winters. They spoke of the eternal cycled life giving itself so life might continue. The tribe bowed their heads, voices murmuring in response, their breath drifting upward like smoke. The hunters joined, their bodies weak but their spirits lifted by the ritual. In this act of remembrance, the tribe bound themselves not only to each other, but to the land and the creatures they shared it with. The ritual ended with the cracking of bone. Stone knives flashed again, sharper now as fresh flakes of flint had been struck for the task. The animal was opened, and the first strips of meat were laid upon flat stones beside the fire. The fat hissed as it dripped into the flames, releasing a smell so rich it made every stomach cramp with hunger. Children shuffled closer, their eyes wide, but the elder raised a hand to hold them back. The hunters would eat first, for without them the tribe would starve. A steaming piece of roasted meat was pressed into the hands of the lead hunter. He lifted it to his mouth, pausing only to whisper his thanks. His teeth tore into it, the juices flooding his tongue, the warmth spreading through his chest. He chewed slowly, savoring it, his body shuddering with relief. Around him, the other hunters ate too, their faces easing from strain into something like peace. Soon the whole tribe was fed. Meat was passed from hand to hand, children giggling as grease smeared their faces, mothers sighing with relief as their little ones ate their fill. The fire blazed higher, fed with branches carried from the forest, the light spilling across the cave walls. Shadows leaped and danced, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. Wolves, deer, men with spears. The stories of the night were etched. In lightened stone, an elder sat by the fire, a long bone in his lap. With practiced movements, he scraped it clean, then hollowed it with a flake of stone. He lifted it to his lips, and a low, haunting note filled the cave. The bone flute sang of triumph and sorrow, of the balance of life and death. The children hushed, listening, their eyes bright in the firelight. Another elder tapped a drum of stretched hide, keeping rhythm with the heartbeat of the earth. Soon, voices joined, humming in unison, the sound filling the cavern like the rising wind. For a moment, The world beyond the cave, the snow, the wolves, the bitter cold ceased to exist. Here, in the glow of fire and song, the tribe found warmth, not only of body, but of spirit. They were bound together by hunger, by fear, by struggle, but also by joy. Survival was not only endurance, was shared memory, shared triumph. The hunters leaned against the cave wall, their eyelids heavy, their bodies sore but satisfied. Children crowded around them, tugging at their furs, begging for the story. How had they brought the deer down? How close had the wolves come? Did the spirits of the ancestors walk beside them in the snow? The hunters smiled wearily, indulging them with gestures and words, describing the chase with wide sweeps of their hands. The children gasped at each detail, their imaginations filling the gaps in the back of the cave. The women worked to preserve what could not be eaten that night. Strips of meat were cut thin and laid upon racks near the fire, the smoke curling around them. Fat was melted and poured into stone vessels, sealing in marrow and scraps. Bones were set aside to be cracked later, for within them lay rich broth, and tools waiting to be shaped. Nothing would be wasted. The night deepened. Outside, the wind screamed against the cliffs, shaking the trees, burying the land in snow. But inside the cave, warmth held strong. Fire roared. Stomachs were full. Voices rose in song, echoing against the stone until it seemed the ancestors themselves were singing back. When the younger children fell asleep, curled against their mothers, the tribe grew quieter. The hunters sat closer to the fire, their faces lit by its glow. They spoke softly now, not of the chase, but of tomorrow. The storm was growing stronger, and the cold would only deepen. More hunts would come, more struggles, more dangers. But tonight, at least, they had one. The lead hunter stared into the flames, his mind drifting. He thought of the wolves, their eyes glowing in the snow. He thought of the deer's last breath, of the exhaustion that had nearly broken him. Survival was never promised, never certain. It had to be taken, wrested from the hands of the world itself. Yet even as weariness pulled him toward sleep, pride filled his chest. They had endured, and because of that, the children would wake tomorrow with food in their bellies and fire to warm their hands. At last, silence fell. Only the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind remained. One by one, the tribe drifted to sleep. Their bodies nestled together, their dreams filled with flickering shadows of deer and flame. The hunters slept last, their spears resting at their sides, the firelight dancing across their faces. They knew the cold would return, the hunger would return, the wolves would return. But for this one night, beneath the sheltering stone, they were safe. They had won the battle against the darkness, and in that victory, no matter how fleeting, there was peace. The day after the feast dawned in silence. Outside the cave, the snow lay heavy across the land, piled in ridges that made the world seem endless and unmoving. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The trees were bent beneath their frozen burden, their branches locked in ice, and the air was so sharp it stung the lungs with every breath. Inside, the tribe stirred slowly. Children rubbed their eyes, whining softly, while mothers pulled them close, wrapping them in furs before they could feel the morning's chill. The fire had burned low during the night, its glow faint, little more than embers crackling under ash. One of the men rose and added wood, coaxing life back into the flames until they flared once more. Pushing away the darkness, the deer from the night before had been a blessing, but already the tribe knew it would not last. Much of the meat had been consumed, and though strips smoked near the fire, the cold would make it harder to preserve what remained. Worse still, the hunters had seen no signs of other herds in the valley. The storm had scattered the animals, driving them to hidden places where men could not easily follow. The elders whispered of lean times to come, their voices carrying an edge of dread. By midday, the cave had grown restless. Hunger gnawed again, not as sharp as before, but lingering, a shadow over every thought. The children played, but even their games lacked energy. They stacked stones, scratched shapes into the dirt, and whispered stories they had heard 100 times before. Their laughter was thin, their eyes dim. The adults exchanged glances, each silently asking the same question: would another hunt be enough? When the sun sank low, its pale light casting long shadows across the snow, the cold returned with force. Wind stirred again, keening across the valley, slipping through cracks in the cave like icy fingers. The tribe gathered closer to the fire, piling furs high, pressing together for warmth. The hunters sharpened their spears, their flint edges catching the glow of the flames. Each strike against the stone sent sparks into the dark, small stars that died before they touched the ground. The elder raised his voice once more. His words carried through the cave, reminding them of the cycle. The deer had given them life, but life was never permanent. The spirits of the land demanded respect and readiness. Tonight, they must not grow soft. Tonight, they must remember that the cold would always return, as sure as the sun rose and fell. The hunters nodded, their jaws tight. They knew what awaited them. Tomorrow, they would go again into the white wilderness, searching for movement, for tracks, for anything that might give hope. But tonight, their task was simpler: endure as darkness settled. The cave became a fragile island of warmth in a sea of endless frost. The fire roared, throwing shadows high across the walls, turning every rock and crevice into something alive. Shapes twisted their wolves with open jaws. Men bent beneath the weight of the snow, deer leaping forever out of reach. The children huddled close to their mothers, wide-eyed, half afraid and half mesmerized. The hunters sat near the entrance, their backs straight, their hands on their weapons. The night carried sounds, faint, distant, but enough to make them wary. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf called, its howl rising, long and mournful. Another answered, and then another, until the air trembled with their chorus. The tribe froze, their hearts pounding, listening to the voices of their oldest enemy. The wolves were hungry too. The lead hunter gripped his spear tighter. He knew what hunger did to beasts. It made them bold, desperate, willing to risk even the fire's edge. The memory of yellow eyes in the storm burned in his mind. He could still feel their gaze, sharp and unrelenting, as though they lingered. Just beyond the tree line now, waiting. The night stretched long. The fire was fed again and again, wood vanishing into flame as quickly as it was carried in. The heat filled the cave, but the fear pressed harder. Every crack of ice outside, every groan of bending trees sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of wind became the breath of wolves. Children whimpered in their sleep. Mothers hushed them, rocking gently, their voices low and steady. The elders muttered prayers, rubbing stones between their hands, their eyes fixed on the fire, as though its flames were a barrier no creature could cross. At last, deep in the night, the howls grew closer. The hunters rose, spears in hand, their silhouettes tall and sharp against the firelight. The tribe fell silent, holding their breath, The only sound was the crackle of flame and the slow, steady scrape of claws on ice outside. The wolves had come. The hunters stood their ground, spears aimed at the cave's mouth. The lead hunter felt his heartbeat thundering, his grip so tight the wood bit into his palm. Shadows flickered outside, swift and low. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, then vanished. Another followed. They circled, waiting, testing the courage of men as much as the strength of stone. For hours the standoff continued. The wolves did not charge, but neither did they leave. The tribe huddled close, praying the fire would not falter, praying the beasts would tire and vanish back into the night. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling across the snow, the wolves were gone. Their tracks crisscrossed the clearing outside the cave, deep and sharp in the frost. The hunters lowered their spears, their arms heavy, their eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. The tribe exhaled in relief, but no one smiled. They all knew that truth, the wolves would return again. The cold was not their only enemy. The morning after the wolves tested, the cave was brittle with silence. The sky stretched pale and cold above the valley, streaked with thin clouds that promised more snow. The hunters rose before the others stirred, wrapping themselves in heavy furs, gripping spears that had grown familiar in their hands. They moved without words, for none were needed. The decision had been made during the long night of staring into firelight and listening to the hungry howls. Today they would hunt. They had no choice. The lead hunter stepped into the snow first. The cold struck his face, sharp as stone. His breath rose in a plume, dissolving into the frozen air. Behind him, 3 more hunters followed, their steps heavy but steady. The tribe watched from the mouth of the cave, eyes wide, bodies huddled. Together, no one spoke, but their silence carried prayers. Every man who left carried the fragile hope of the group with him. The snow outside was marked with deep impressions of hoof tracks, layered one over the other, weaving patterns like scars. Across the white surface, the hunters studied them, their brows furrowed. The beasts had circled close, too close, but had held back. Hunger had restrained them. Hunger would also bring them back. That knowledge pressed on every step the hunters took as they moved down into the forest. The trees rose around them like pillars, their branches heavy with frost, their trunks dark and unyielding. The silence was nearly complete, broken only by the creak of ice and the crunch of snow beneath their feet. The world felt hollow, emptied of movement, as though the storm had driven every living creature into the earth itself. Still, they pressed. On, the lead hunter scanned the ground for signs, his eyes sharp, his body tense. At last, faint markings appeared, a line of small tracks, pressed shallow into the snow. A hare too small to feed them all, but food nonetheless. The men slowed, stalking carefully, their spears ready. They found it not far ahead, crouched beneath a bush, its body white as the snow, nearly invisible. The lead hunter struck swiftly, his spear flashing downward. The hare squealed, then fell silent. The men exhaled as one, relief cutting through the cold. It was not enough, but it was something. The hunter tied it to his belt, and they moved on. Hours passed. The forest grew denser, the snow deeper. The hunters' breaths came heavy now, and their legs ached with each step. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, slowing them, dulling their senses. But they pushed forward, knowing that to return with too little was to invite death upon the tribe. At last, they reached a clearing. The snow there was churned, disturbed, marked by deep, wide prints. The hunters froze, their hearts quickening. The tracks were fresh, elk, perhaps even a small herd. Their eyes lit with a spark of hope, and they followed swiftly, moving with care, every sound measured. Then they saw it. A young elk, thin but alive, pawing through the snow to reach the frozen grass below. Its ribs showed faintly through its hide, but its body was strong enough to feed many. The hunters crouched low, circling wide, their movements practiced and silent. Spears glinted faintly in the pale light. The lead hunter signaled. The men moved, in unison. One advanced from the left, another from the right. The elk lifted its head, ears twitching, eyes wide with sudden fear. It stamped once, then turned to flee. The hunters struck. Spears flew, their sharp points cutting through the air. One struck true, biting into the elk's side. It stumbled, cried out, and tried to run, but the hunters closed in. Another spear pierced its flank. A final thrust brought it down, its body falling hard into the snow. The men rushed forward, their breaths ragged, their eyes wild with relief. The kill was theirs. They wasted no time. Knives of sharpened stone cut into the hide, peeling it back, blood steaming as it met the icy air. The hunters worked quickly, slicing, dividing, packing meat into hide bundles. The bones cracked beneath their blows, marrow spilling, rich and vital. They would carry back as much as they could, every scrap precious. But as they worked, a sound broke the silence. A howl, it carried across the forest, long and low, vibrating through the hunter's bones. Then another, closer. The men froze, their hands slick with blood, their eyes darting. They knew the truth instantly. The wolves had followed. The lead hunter cursed under his breath. He gripped his spear tightly, his body tense. The elk's blood would draw them swiftly now. They could not linger. "Take what you can," he growled, his voice sharp as flint. "We move." The hunters obeyed, stuffing raw cuts of meat into their packs, binding them tight. The carcass was left half-torn, steaming in the snow. Already, the forest seemed alive with movement. Shadows flickered. At the edges of sight, the men rose, their burdens heavy, and began the long march back. Their steps were quick, their breaths ragged. The howls followed, weaving through the trees, growing closer, bolder. Every snap of a twig sent their hearts racing. The wolves were not merely hunting. They were driving, pushing, testing the men's strength against their own hunger. As the sun began to fall once more, the hunters glimpsed the edge of the valley. Relief flared, but fear still clung. The cave was near, yet the distance felt endless. Each step weighted by the threat at their heels. When at last they broke through the final line of trees, the cave mouth appeared like salvation, glowing faintly with firelight. The tribe surged forward at the sight of the returning men, their eyes wide, their voices rising in cries of joy. Children ran to meet them, but were pulled back swiftly as the hunters barked warnings. Behind them, the wolves had come into view. Dozens of glowing eyes peered from the tree line, low bodies slipping between the shadows. The pack had grown. The hunters staggered into the cave, throwing their burdens down by the fire. Spears clattered to the ground, breath coming in great heaving gasps. The tribe pressed close, their joy swiftly replaced with fear. Outside, the wolves gathered. There, howls rose again, deafening, shaking the walls of stone. The night was not yet safe. The first stones were thrown before the tribe had even caught its breath. From the cave's edge, Men lifted heavy rocks, hurling them into the night where glowing eyes flashed between the trees. The thuds echoed, some striking hard against frozen bark, others falling with dull cracks into snow. The wolves flinched, but did not retreat. They paced in the dark, a restless line of hunger, their shapes shifting in and out of sight. The tribe gathered close to the fire. Women clutched children, pressing their faces into furs to shield them from the sound. The hunters stood at the front, spears in hand, their bodies rigid with fatigue and resolve. Blood from the elk still stained their hides. They were weary, but there was no time to rest. The howls came again, rising into the sky like a storm breaking open. This time, they did not stop. The pack was calling, weaving their voices together. And then suddenly, the shadows surged forward. The first wolf darted from the tree line, its body low, its paws pounding the snow. Another followed, then two more, their eyes burning, their teeth bared. They rushed the mouth of the cave. The hunters roared, their voices raw, their fear buried beneath fury. Spears thrust outward, sharp stone tips glinting in firelight. One struck true, jabbing deep into the shoulder of the led wolf. It yelped, twisting away, blood spraying hot against the snow. Another rock crashed down, slamming into a wolf's ribs, sending it sprawling. But still, they came. The first of the beasts leaped for the entrance, jaws wide, snapping. A hunter met it head-on, driving his spear upward. The point pierced the wolf's chest, and the beast thrashed, snarling until its body gave way, falling limp at his feet. He kicked it aside, his chest heaving, his arms trembling. The pack pulled back, circling, their eyes gleaming with a strange intelligence. They would not break through icily, but they would not stop. They were patient. They were many. Inside the cave, fear rippled through the people. Children whimpered. An elder muttered prayers in a low, shaking voice. The fire crackled, throwing wild shadows against the walls, painting the tribe in flickering light. The hunters tightened their grip on their weapons. Their faces were drawn, their eyes hard. They knew the wolves were testing them, probing for weakness, and they knew the truth that clawed at every thought. The wolves were not merely after flesh, they were after the meat. The elk's blood had stained the snow, its scent carried far on the wind. The pack would not leave until it was theirs. The night dragged on. The wolves came in waves. They would lunge forward, snapping, teeth flashing, only to dart back when stones rained down or spears thrust outward. One beast, lean and desperate, managed to clamp its jaws on the arm of a young hunter. The man screamed, his body twisting as he fought. Another drove his spear into the wolf's flank, and it fell, dragging the hunter down with it. His arm was torn and bleeding, but he lived. The women pulled him back, pressing furs to the wound, their hands shaking. Every strike was followed by silence. Every silence was followed by howls. The tribe's nerves stretched thin, every breath sharp, every sound magnified. The fire burned lower, and panic began to rise. If the flames died, they would be lost. The lead hunter barked orders, his voice harsh. Two women and an elder rushed to feed the fire, breaking apart frozen logs, shoving them into the flames. Sparks rose, snapping, as the blaze leaped higher once more. Relief spread, but it was thin, fragile. Outside, the wolves circled. The snow was dark now, stained with streaks of blood. Two dead wolves lay motionless near the cave, their bodies steaming faintly. The rest paced, waiting, always waiting, there. Eyes glowed in the firelight, a shifting wall of hunger. The lead hunter's chest heaved as he leaned on his spear. His breath came in bursts, his body aching from battle and cold. He looked at the bodies of the slain wolves, at the meat they still carried inside, and a thought struck him, a desperate, savage thought. He motioned to the others. Together, they dragged the wolf carcasses out, tossing them into the snow. The pack froze, eyes fixed, ears pricked. For a moment, the forest held its breath. Then, with a snarl, the wolves lunged, tearing into the bodies of their own. The tribe watched in silence as the beasts ripped and devoured, growling and snapping at one another, their frenzy filling the night. Flesh tore, bones cracked, blood spilled into the snow, black in the firelight. It bought them time, but not enough, as the last scraps of the bodies vanished into snarling jaws. The wolves turned again, their eyes lifted, their muzzles dripping red, and they fixed once more. On the cave, their hunger had not dimmed. It had only sharpened. The lead hunter's jaw clenched. He turned to the tribe, his eyes fierce. "They will not stop," he said, his voice low but steady. "Not until dawn. We hold." The others nodded, though fear weighed on their faces. Spears were lifted again. Stones were readied. The fire roared higher, filling the cave with smoke and heat. The wolves advanced. Once more, the night erupted into chaos. Snarls and shouts, the clash of stone and tooth, the wet crack of spears piercing flesh. The battle raged, not in one great surge, but in endless, grinding waves. The tribe was tested with every heartbeat, with every howl that split the darkness. Outside, the snow grew red. Inside, the people clung to fire and one another, praying silently for the first hint of light on the horizon. The siege of the wolves had begun. The fire crackled and spat, its smoke curling against the roof of the cave. Every face was painted with its orange glow. Wide eyes, lips pressed tight, sweat beading despite the cold. Outside, the wolves still circled, relentless shadows slipping. Between the trees, their patience seemed endless, their hunger deeper than the night itself. The hours dragged on. The tribe fought in bursts, each attack breaking like a wave against stone spears and flung rocks, only to retreat and reform. Sometimes the wolves snapped so close that hot breath brushed against human skin. Sometimes claws raked the frozen earth inches from the entrance. Every time, the tribe roared back with desperation. Children slept in fits, jerking awake at every howl. Mothers held them tight, rocking them as though motion itself could shield them. The wounded hunter groaned in pain, his blood seeping through the furs bound to his arm. Yet even he lifted stones with his good hand, throwing them weakly but with all the strength left in him. The lead hunter never sat, never blinked long enough to let fear seep in. His voice was hoarse from shouting, his muscles trembling, but his eyes stayed fixed on the night. He knew the truth, pressing down on them like the weight of the mountain above. If they faltered even once, if the fire fell or a line broke, the wolves would pour in. And then the darkest hour arrived. The fire sputtered low. The logs had been fed again and again, but the pile was nearly gone. The tribe searched desperately, breaking apart what they could. Spare wooden tools, parts of sleds, even a carved figure one elder had kept for seasons untold. Into the flames it all went, sacrificed for survival. The wolves sensed the weakness. Their howls rose higher, their bodies shifting closer, their movements bolder. A great silver wolf stepped forward from the line, larger than the rest, its fur glistening with frost and blood. Its eyes glowed like twin embers. It did not rush. It simply stared into the cave, unblinking, its presence commanding the others. The pack shifted with it, their bodies lowering, their teeth flashing in the firelight. The lead hunter's grip tightened on his spear. He raised it, his body square, his voice a growl. Hold. The attack came like an avalanche. Wolves burst forward, their snarls deafening, their bodies colliding with the barricade of stone and bone the tribe had hastily piled. Spears struck out, finding flesh, but claws scraped across shields of hide, and teeth sank into fur-wrapped limbs. The fire blazed as a wolf leaped through its edge, flames licking its tail, and landed inside the cave. Screams tore through the air. The beast lunged at the nearest figure, a woman clutching her child. At the last instant, another hunter rammed, his spear through its ribs. The wolf howled, twisting, its jaws snapping inches from the child's face before it collapsed. Thrashing, finally still, chaos reigned. Wolves slammed against the barricade, some breaking through. The cave filled with snarls and shouts, bodies colliding in a storm of noise and fury. Men and women alike swung clubs, drove stones down, stabbed with sharpened bone. Blood slicked the floor, the stench sharp and metallic. The silver wolf entered last. It moved with terrible calm, weaving between its kin, its eyes fixed not on meat but on the lead hunter. The two locked gazes across the cave, predator to predator, neither yielding. The wolf growled low, the sound vibrating through stone, and then it charged. The clash was brutal. The spear struck, but the wolf twisted, teeth closing around the shaft, snapping it in half. The hunter stumbled, but he grabbed a shard, driving it upward as the beast slammed into him. They fell to the ground, rolling in a blur of fur and flesh, claws tearing, hands striking. The fire's glow flickering across the struggle. For a moment, it seemed the wolf would win. Its jaws closed around the hunter's shoulder, teeth piercing deep. His cry rang out, raw and ragged, blood poured. But even as pain racked him, his hand held the broken spear. With a final, desperate heave, he drove it upward, burying it into the wolf's throat. The beast froze, its eyes widened, its breath rasped. Then it collapsed, its body shuddering before going still. The cave fell silent, but for the crackle of fire and the ragged breaths of the survivors. The remaining wolves paused at the entrance, their heads low, their bodies tense. They looked to the fallen silver one, their leader, their anchor. For a heartbeat, the night held its breath. Then one by one they turned, melting back into the forest. Their howls faded, swallowed by the trees. The tribe stood trembling, weapons still raised, unsure if it was truly over. Slowly, the realization spread. They had endured. The lead hunter pushed the body of the silver wolf aside, his chest heaving. Blood covered him, his wound deep, but he stood. His eyes turned to the faintest shimmer on the horizon, the first. Pale grey of dawn breaking through the night. The long darkness was ending. Inside the cave, the people collapsed where they stood, tears mixing with laughter, exhaustion pulling at every limb. Mothers kissed their children's foreheads, whispering blessings. Elders clasped one another's hands, their voices hoarse with relief. The wounded were tended, their pain softened by the knowledge that they had survived. The fire burned low, now reduced to glowing embers, but it no longer needed to roar. The light outside grew stronger, filling the cave with something brighter than flame dot. As the sun rose above the frozen world, the tribe stepped to the mouth of the cave. They looked out upon the snow, red with the night's battle, the bodies of wolves and men alike lying still. They bowed their heads in respect for the fallen, for the struggle, for the bond between hunter and hunted that had been written in blood. The lead hunter lifted his gaze to the rising sun. His body trembled with pain, but his spirit was unbroken. He knew the night had tested them, stripped them to their rawest selves. And yet, like their ancestors before them, they had endured. The cold would come again. The hunger would return. The dangers of the wild would never fade. But the fire of survival still burned within them, carried from one night to the next, from one generation to another. And so, beneath the endless sky, in a land ruled by ice and shadow, the cavemen learned once more the oldest truth of all. Together, with courage and fire, they could outlast even the darkest night.